Hi, my name's David Miner, and I'm a Christian counselor who's passionate about helping teen boys and their families. And in this video, I'm going to talk about why so many teen boys are struggling. Now, you might not be aware that boys are struggling, and honestly, I wasn't until I started working as a counselor. But in Canada and the United States and in most Western countries, boys are not doing well. They're not doing with their mental health. They have high rates of suicide, high rates of drug abuse, and lower test scores in high school, and they have higher unemployment in young adulthood. And so when I started working with teen boys in child and youth mental health, I just started asking myself the question, like, why are they struggling? Why are they having so many issues? And I found the book, The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell. And that book really opened my eyes to realize that boys are really in need. They really are in desperate need of help. And it set me on a mission to figuring out, what does that mean? Why are they struggling? Why do they need that help? And how can I, as a counselor, help them? And now, as a father of two boys, when I started my work as a counselor, I didn't have any children. But now that I have two boys myself who are growing up, how can I be the best father for them? How can I show up for them in a good way? So in this video, I'm going to talk about what are the underlying reasons for those struggles and how can you as a parent come alongside your son in a helpful way. So the first and biggest reason I think boys are struggling is because they're lonely. Now, you might be thinking, maybe your son struggles with mental health issues, but he has lots of friends, or he's always hanging out with his friends. There's sort of the kid who doesn't have friends and he spends a lot of time at home playing video games. He might have mostly online friends, which are still friends, but he doesn't have friends at school, so he feels isolated. But there's also the kid who's successful in school, successful in sports, and yet he's still struggling. And you might be thinking, well, that kid isn't lonely. But I would put it to you that both of these kids are lonely. They just look different. I was the example of the more extroverted, successful kid in high school. I was good in sports, I was good in school, and I was involved in church. But actually, I was really lonely. And I didn't realize it at the time. It was only through my 20s and 30s and doing counseling and kind of doing some exploring and soul searching that I realized that I was actually really lonely. And the reason for this is because young adults nowadays are peer oriented. If you haven't read the book, Hold On to Your Kids, I highly recommend it. It's written by Gabor Mate and Gordon Neufeld, who are both local to BC and quite well known in the mental health field. In the book, they describe when they had teenagers how they recognized that their teenagers were starting to distance themselves from them. They wondered why. I think I'm good at communicating and understand young people, and yet they were struggling with their teens. And so they started to look into it, and they developed this concept of peer orientation, which is the idea that young adults and teenagers nowadays are more attached to their peers. They're closer with their peers than they are adults. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, duh, that's obvious. That wasn't the natural order of things. That isn't how things are supposed to go. Children and adolescents are supposed to feel more connected with their parents and more connected with family. And even throughout history, kids had friends and they had peers and spent time playing with them. Their primary connection, their primary sense of direction, guidance, support was from their parents. But now, with the advent of modernity, with parents working more and kids spending more time with peers at school and extracurriculars, that has flipped. Kids are more attached to their peers, and with the advent of the iPhone and technology, that has just widened the gap even further. And so the reason why young men and teens are struggling with loneliness, despite the fact that they might be always with their friends, whether they be gaming online constantly or hanging out with them after school constantly, is that those relationships can't give the depth of intimacy and support that they need, because those other friendships are with young people who are struggling with the same things they are. They don't have the wisdom, the life experience, and they're not stable in their life. Friends come and go, but parents are forever. I've experienced this a lot when I'm conducting family assessments and looking at the social history, is that with young men who are struggling, girls as well, there's often a history of friendships breaking down. Often in the middle school years, all of these kids are peer oriented. They are intensely jockeying for position and trying to get one up on each other. And there's a lot of social aggression and bullying because of that. Unless we solve the issue of peer orientation, we're never going to solve the issue of bullying, because at the root of it, it's an attachment issue. They're looking to each other as their primary supports. And if they don't have a friend group or they don't feel esteem in the eyes of their peers, then it's the worst thing imaginable to them. And that's why they become suicidal. If they don't feel connected with friends and they're not connected with parents, because most kids are peer oriented, then they don't see any hope in life. And so You might find this discouraging in the sense that maybe you think you have a good connection with your child and they're still struggling, and you're thinking, well, I think I do have a good relationship with my child and they do come to me for things. I'm not saying that every child who is struggling has a poor relationship with their parents. Our culture is one in which peers turn to each other for guidance, and generally that leads to a sense of loneliness, a sense of insecurity with friendships, and a fear and anxiety around losing them that contributes to mental health problems. And so I think the number one thing we can do as parents to help our kids with their mental health is by connecting with them daily through rituals of connection, where you do things together that they enjoy, and maybe sometimes you do things that you enjoy. Connecting with your kids is the number one most important thing you can do to help their mental health. If you brought them to a counselor but didn't connect with them, or if you connected them and didn't bring them to a counselor, connecting with them on an individual level would be far more beneficial to them in the short and long term than individual counseling. Research actually shows that individual counseling for children and adolescents isn't very effective when it doesn't involve the family. That's why when I'm working with a family, I always meet with the parents separately for parent coaching to help them with strategies around setting boundaries around screen time and increasing parenting time and dealing with big emotions that often come up with that. And then family therapy to help work through the wounds and the issues that have maybe driven a wedge and have caused a lack of trust, and repairing those, in addition to working individually with the child. The good news is that you have everything that you need to help your child with their mental health, which is you, yourself. The biggest challenge is just cutting through the giant web and maze of activities and screen time and all the things that get in the way of connection. It involves looking at yourself and your own behaviors. How much time do you spend doing things like on screen-based social media, or maybe you spend too much time working in the evenings that takes away from connection time. Parents nowadays really have to fight for that. We really have to fight for that time, that family time, and that connecting time. So let's talk about number 2. What is the second biggest reason that I see for young men struggling? And without a doubt, I can say that it is a lack of purpose in their life. And the reason for this is because our society has become so materialistic and so driven by a desire to acquire goods as a way of happiness that young men, they have this sense or this feeling, or it's communicated to them through media and through people in their life, that if they don't have a really good job, then they're not going to be able to have a happy life. Now, I don't want to minimize the stresses and the realities of inflation, of unemployment, of disruptive industries like AI, and how that is affecting everyone. That's very real and true. Obviously, you need to find a job that you find meaningful. But what I'm talking about is this pervasive and general sense that is in us, in me too, that we need to have more to be happy. We need to have more stuff. We need to have more vacations. We need to have more sports. We need to have more success. And what that leads to is an exhausting rat race that burns out parents. And then the kids look at their parents and they go, you know, on one hand, I want what my parents did for me. I want to create a good life for myself and my kids. But I feel like if I don't get a 6-figure plus job, that's not going to be on the table. But even if I do get that job, like what is on offer for that? My parents seem stressed. They seem tired. They seem exhausted. And so they are living the Canadian dream, so to speak, but they're not even happy, right? So we as parents can get sucked into that. And I feel the pressures. My son is only 7, and I already feel the pressure to be involved in everything and keep up with the Joneses in this Vancouver fast-paced lifestyle of recreation and sports and groups. And it just leads to this exhausting sense of there's no deeper purpose and meaning in life. And so one thing that you can do as a parent to help pry your son's eyes away from money and worldly success as his measuring stick for happiness and for a meaningful life is thinking about your purpose, your individual purpose, and your purpose as a family, right? Because the only way your son's going to find a sense of purpose and meaning that's deeper than just materialism and financial gain is by modeling it and by living it as a family. How do we spend our time as a family? Do you as parents spend most of your time working, and then do your children spend most of their time, getting good marks in school so they can get a good job and playing lots of sports so that they can be popular and successful and have lots of extracurriculars so they can get into UBC and get a job as XYZ? How much time as a family do you spend serving others? How much time as a family do you spend thinking about why God put you on this earth? What are the unique skills and abilities that you have that your children have that they can give to the world? The more that you allot time for that, the more your son will feel like his life really matters. Because at the end of the day, high school, to be honest, a lot of it, it doesn't really matter in the end. It's a lot of hoop jumping. I'm not discounting, high school entirely, and I think teachers do a great job. But I think the main value that young men get out of high school is having mentors and role models. So when they look at teachers who engage them and believe in them and value them, that's the value. But because of the way that modern education is set up, a lot of it is just busy work. And it's a lot of learning things that they're not going to use later in life. And so they become unmotivated. They're like, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to use this, as an adult. I'm not going to use this in my personal life. This is not going to help me professionally. If they want to go to post-secondary, they know, okay, I need to get, a B plus average or something to get in there. But it doesn't give them a sense of purpose. It just gives them a sense of meaningless, of like, why am I doing these things that I hate? I hate school. The only reason I'm going is for my friends, right? That's 99% of boys, right? So what's the point? The point is to see my friends, right? And that's how purpose works. It starts through a relationship. And then once that relationship is established, it's, who matters to me? Who do I matter to? And then what are we doing together that matters, right? So when a young man is hanging out with his friends, he's thinking, who cares about me? Who wants to hang out with me? And then when they're together, it's what are we doing together that's meaningful? And because there's no deeper meaning, the deeper meaning that we're all called to is for service, right? Serving the community and building our families, building our communities. But because our culture is a nihilistic, it's materialistic and hedonistic, it reverts back to pleasure seeking. So that's why you see young men struggling with substance abuse, because there's no deeper meaning and purpose. There's no community. There's no service. So I'll just be Peter Pan. Once you've connected with your son, if you want to help him get a sense of purpose, think about, what as a family do we have to offer? Connect with people in your community, maybe your neighbors, right? Do you have a neighbor who's lonely? Can we go bring over some food? Can we go spend time with them? And that is the bridge that you can connect your son to purpose, is by modeling that, by living out a life of purpose, not this rat race, this materialistic, hedonistic rat race that our culture says, but what is really meaningful and valuable to us as a family. So I want to end with an encouragement that, you might be overwhelmed with all the problems that your son has. He might have different diagnoses like ADHD, autism, OCD, video game addiction, and it can feel overwhelming at times. But I want to encourage you that you have everything that you need. Because what your son needs is you. And what you need is him. You need each other. Through connecting, through play and through recreation, and through exploring and asking the question, what is our family vision and what is our mission as a family? What did God put us here to do? All the other issues, not as relevant. I'm not saying there's no need for counseling. I'm not saying there's no need for psychiatry and professions. But what I'm saying is that the deeper issue that all these other surface symptoms are showing is that loneliness, that lack of purpose. And that manifests itself in these ways. So when you address the root issue, then the symptoms will cease and no longer be a thing. So I hope that you found that helpful. And I wish you all the best with your parenting and in your life. And thank you for watching.